Title: The House That Refused to Disappear. The True History of Mar-a-Lago. There is a strange comfort in famous places. You see them in photographs and headlines. You see them standing in the sun, year after year, and your brain quietly files them under permanent. As if stone and money can defeat time. Mar-a-Lago almost proved the opposite. On a narrow barrier island in Palm Beach, Florida, there is an estate that runs from the Atlantic Ocean on one side to Lake Worth Lagoon on the other. That is why its name translates as sea to lake. 17 acres, on one of the most valuable strips of land in America. A house so large it feels less like a home and more like a small kingdom. Now picture the year 1985. The ocean breeze is warm, the road is calm, and behind a gate, the property is silent. No orchestra, no laughter spilling into the courtyard, no staff moving like shadows with trays and linens. Just stillness. The kind of stillness that does not mean peace. It means abandonment. In that silence, a crew is ready. Not a crew to repair the roof or repaint a wall. A demolition crew. The paperwork exists. Permits have been approved. Plans are drawn. Machines are waiting for the signal. The reason is not scandal or hatred. The reason is something colder. Mar-a-Lago has become a burden. A beautiful burden, but a burden all the same. A palace is expensive when it is full. It becomes terrifyingly expensive when it is empty. Humidity creeps into wood. Salt air eats metal. Pipes squahaji. Roofs leak. Paint blisters. Gardens turn wild and then die. Every week without attention is a week where the building loses a piece of itself. Buyers have walked through and imagined a dream. Then they do the math. How many staff do you need? How many repairs every year? How much insurance? How much electricity? How much security? They step back and realize the same truth. This is not a house. This is an operation. So the estate that once represented the high point of Palm Beach glamour is now at the same cliff edge where many American mansions have vanished. Neglect. Then, the idea that starting over is easier. Then the paperwork. Then the bulldozers. And at the last moment, the story swerves. A buyer steps in. The machines stop. The palace survives. You already know the buyer. You have heard the name for decades. But if we start there, we miss the deeper story. The deeper story is how a coast, once known for sand and mosquitoes, became a winter stage for the richest people in America. How one woman built a palace so grand that even the United States government could not afford to keep it. And how this building kept finding new meaning across different eras. To understand why the house refused to disappear, we have to travel backward. Far backward. Back to a time when the island did not yet feel like luxury. Back to an accident at sea and a beach scattered with coconuts. Palm Beach began as a legend built on salvage. According to early settler accounts, a Spanish ship called the Providencia ran aground near this coast in January of 1878. The ship carried various cargo, but the detail that stuck in local memory was the coconuts. Thousands of them spilled onto the sand. In a remote region where supplies could be scarce, those coconuts were a gift. People gathered them by the cartload. Some opened them for food and water. Many planted them. Coconut palms were not native to South Florida, but they could grow there. The coastline slowly changed. A rough shore began to look tropical, and the image of palms became part of the place identity. At the time, the region around Lake Worth was not a resort. It was the edge of settlement. Hot summers. Insects, storms, isolation. Transportation was difficult. The barrier island itself was narrow and wild. To cross the lagoon, you needed a boat. To reach the area from the north could take days. Still, a few adventurous travelers came. Warm weather in winter was a powerful lure even then. In 1880, the first small hotel opened to serve them. The accommodations were simple, but the existence of that hotel proved a simple economic truth. Demand was waiting. If someone could make the journey easier and the stay comfortable, the wealthy would come in far greater numbers. For years, the island remained quiet. Then one man arrived who understood how to manufacture a destination. He did not just build a hotel. He built a system, tracks and timetables, advertising and infrastructure, luxury and labor. His name was Henry Morrison Flagler. Flagler made his fortune in oil and then poured it into railroads and hotels. He understood the power of the package. If you control the trip and the destination, you control the entire experience. And if you control the experience, you can sell it to the people who can afford the best. In 1893, Flagler visited the barrier island and the lagoon. He saw something that today seems obvious. The geography was perfect for a winter resort. On one side, the open Atlantic with wind and waves. On the other side, calm water sheltered from storms. Between them, a strip of land that could be made into a private world. On February 11, 1894, Flagler opened the Royal Poinciana Hotel. The building was enormous for its time. It quickly became famous as a vast wooden resort. On opening day, the hotel had hundreds of rooms and only a handful of guests. But the message was not about the first night. It was about the future. Palm Beach was now open for business. That same year, the Florida East Coast Railway began service to West Palm Beach. Trains brought wealthy visitors south and carried them over to the island. A support community developed across the lagoon. West Palm Beach incorporated in 1894 and grew as the working counterpart to the resort. This relationship shaped Palm Beach forever. On the island, you had the stage. On the mainland, you had the backstage. Guests saw polished lawns and elegant dinners. Behind that, you had workers' kitchens, laundry docks, warehouses, and the daily labor that kept the fantasy running. Flagler did not stop with one hotel. In 1896, he opened a second resort on the ocean side. It began as the Palm Beach Inn, and later became known as the Breakers. Now Palm Beach offered both lagoon-side grandeur and oceanfront views. The wealthy could choose, and the social calendar expanded. Flagler also built Whitehall, his own winter home, completed in 1902. It had 75 rooms and an interior built to impress. Whitehall made a statement that spread across the island. If the founder of this resort world lived like a European prince, then others could follow. Palm Beach became a place where social life was not casual. It was structured. There was a season. There were arrival dates and departure dates. There were dinners, dances, and charity events. There were clubs and committees. There were quiet rules about who belonged and who did not. To understand why Mar-a-Lago mattered, you have to understand Palm Beach society in the early 20th century. It was not just rich people sitting in the sun. It was a system. Every winter, the island filled with visitors from New York, Boston, Philadelphia, and other northern cities. They arrived with trunks and staff. They stayed for weeks. For some families, the season was the center of their year. It was where marriages were arranged, where friendships were made, where business deals began, and where reputations rose or fell. The hotels were like grand stations. The Royal Poinciana by the lagoon. The Breakers on the ocean. Lobbies filled with people watching each other. Dining rooms where you could see who was in favor and who was fading. A walk down a corridor could feel like a public appearance. Then the private houses expanded. The wealthiest families did not want to be hotel guests forever. They wanted their own compounds. They bought land and hired architects. They imported styles. They created courtyards and loggias that made Florida winter feel like a European coast. Mediterranean revival became the dominant language. Arches and red roofs, stucco walls, iron balconies, towers that looked like old bell towers. A visitor could walk down a Palm Beach street and feel as if the island was pretending to be Spain or Italy. This was not an accident. It was branding. Palm Beach was selling a fantasy of old-world elegance in a new-world setting. In this society, hosting was power. If you could host an event that everyone wanted to attend, you shaped the season. If your house could hold a ballroom-sized crowd, you became a center. If your dinners were famous, you gained influence. A mansion was not only a home, it was a tool for social position. This is why the size of Mar-a-Lago mattered. Marjorie Post did not simply want to join Palm Beach. She wanted to build a place that could compete with the biggest hotels as a social stage. That required architecture designed for crowds. Now, we return to Marjorie herself. Because she did not build Mar-a-Lago by accident. She built it because she understood this machine and decided to become one of its engines. Marjorie Post inherited wealth, but she also inherited responsibility. Her father, C.W. Post, built a food business, and when he died in 1914, Marjorie was 27 years old. Suddenly, she controlled a fortune and a major company. Many people in her position might have let others run everything. Marjorie did not. She learned the machinery of business. Over time, the company expanded, and became part of what the public would know as General Foods. Marjorie became one of the richest women on Earth. But wealth alone does not explain her. Her life shows a pattern. She did not only collect, she built. She invested. She transformed. One example is her involvement with quick freezing technology developed by Clarence Birdseye. In the early 20th century, frozen food was not normal. Birdseye method allowed food to be frozen quickly and retain quality. Marjorie and her company recognized the value and made a major move into frozen foods. Today, frozen food is ordinary. Back then, it was a leap. This ability to see the future is important because it is the same mindset she brought to Palm Beach. Her personal life moved through several marriages. In 1920, she married financier Edward F. Hutton. They became a famous couple. They lived in a world where business deals and social events mixed together. They traveled, they entertained, they collected art, and they were very aware that in places like Palm Beach, a home is not just shelter, it is a statement. By the early 1920s, Marjorie wanted a winter estate in Palm Beach that would be more than a mansion. She wanted a place that could hold a crowd like a hotel but feel like a private home. A place where she could host charity events on a massive scale. A place that could become a landmark. The key was land. A normal Palm Beach lot could hold a villa. Marjorie wanted a compound. She found a rare property on the barrier island that stretched from ocean to lagoon, 17 acres, 2 waterfronts, a natural sense of boundary. She could build an entire world behind gates. She named it Mar-a-Lago, sea to lake, and then she began to recruit the people who could turn the name into reality. She hired Marion Sims Wyeth as architect. Wyeth designed many Mediterranean-style houses in Palm Beach and understood how to use patios and open spaces to catch winter sun and breezes. She also hired Joseph Urban, a designer famous for theatrical vision. Urban could create interiors that felt like drama, murals, ceilings, lighting, texture, the emotional impact of space. Marjorie did not approach them like a customer buying a product. She approached them like a producer, creating a production. She wanted a palace, and she wanted it to feel like it belonged to history, even though it would be new. Construction began in 1924, and almost immediately, the project became one of the most intense building efforts on the island. To build Mar-a-Lago in the 1920s was to fight geography every day. A barrier island is beautiful, but it is fragile. Sand shifts. Salt rides the wind. Water is always near and always threatening. Even a calm day can carry corrosion. Marjorie Post did not build a simple Florida house. She built an estate filled with imported materials and craft. That meant constant shipments. Crates of tile, stone, metalwork, furniture, decorative elements that had to travel long distances and arrive intact. Among the most famous details is the tile. Marjorie acquired tens of thousands of tiles, including a large set of old Spanish tiles dating to the 15th century. These tiles were not simply decoration, they were a message. This house was not pretending to be old. It was embedding real pieces of history into its walls. She also acquired many roof tiles in different colors to complement the exterior. And she brought in stone and marble elements from abroad. Some sources describe black and white marble floor blocks brought from a castle in Cuba. Whether you focus on tiles or marble, the theme is consistent. Marjorie wanted the house to feel like a global collection. The architecture followed the Mediterranean revival language of Palm Beach, but expanded it. The main house wrapped around a large courtyard in a broad U shape. The courtyard acted like an outdoor living room. It created privacy. It made air and light part of the interior experience. It offered a central stage for gatherings where guests could move between indoor rooms and open sky without leaving the protected world of the estate. A tower rose above the structure like a bell tower in Spain. In Palm Beach, towers are not necessary for function. They are necessary for silhouette. A tower says, "This is not just a villa. This is a palace." Inside, Joseph Urban designed rooms with deliberate emotion. He used painted ceilings and gilded details. He used chandeliers and dramatic lighting. He understood the theater concept that a room should tell you how to feel the moment you enter. Some rooms were rich and intimate. Others were expansive and ceremonial. The estate included around 126 rooms and a large interior area, often described as more than 100,000 square feet for the total complex. Numbers vary depending on what spaces are counted, but the point is clear. This was not a private house in the normal sense. It was a private institution. There were guest suites, staff quarters, dining rooms, music rooms, libraries, courtyards and gardens, a ballroom built to host large events. The estate was designed as much for crowds as for family. Marjorie spent about $7 million on construction. In modern purchasing power, that represents well over $100 million. This was a deliberate investment in permanence, or at least it was meant to be. But Florida tests permanence. In 1926, a major hurricane struck South Florida. Palm Beach is no stranger to storms, but this one reinforced the truth that coastal beauty comes with coastal violence. The estate endured, but it was a warning written in wind and water. If you build a palace here, you must protect it forever. By 1927, Mar-a-Lago was complete, and Marjorie Post was ready to do what she did best: create a world and invite people into it. Mar-a-Lago was built during a fever dream moment in Florida history. In the early 1920s, land prices soared. Newspapers promoted Florida as a paradise where fortunes could be made quickly. Investors bought lots they had never seen. Developers promised cities on paper. People arrived with cash and with dreams. Palm Beach was not immune. If anything, it was at the top of the pyramid. Wealthy northerners already treated the island as a winter stage. Now the stage lights grew brighter. If you could build a house that became part of the season, you could become part of the story. Architecture became a competition. Mediterranean revival style was fashionable because it felt warm and romantic and old. It suggested a world of courtyards and seaside towns. It fit the climate. It also fit the social fantasy of Palm Beach. You could live in Florida and feel as if you were living in a European resort. Designers like Addison Misner influenced the look of the island. He promoted Spanish and Mediterranean forms and helped turn Palm Beach into a place where arches and red roofs became a kind of uniform for wealth. Even people who did not know the history of Spain wanted the feeling of it. They wanted a house that looked timeless, even if it was built yesterday. Marjorie Post built Mar-a-Lago inside this boom, and partly in response to it. She was not building in a quiet market. She was building in a moment when everyone was trying to build something memorable. Her answer was to build something not just memorable but overwhelming, a compound that would be impossible to ignore. If Palm Beach was a contest, Marjorie decided to play at the highest level. The boom would eventually cool and much of Florida would crash. But Mar-a-Lago was already rising. And once a palace is built, it keeps demanding attention whether the market is hot or cold. Before we talk about the parties and the charity, imagine walking through Mar-a-Lago on a calm winter afternoon. You enter through the gates and the noise of the road fades. Palm trees and hedges guide you forward. The air smells like salt and flowers. Ahead, the building rises in pale tones with a tower that catches the sun. You pass into the courtyard. Now the space feels sheltered. Walls block the wind. Fountains and water features bring a soft sound that covers conversation. The courtyard is open to the sky, but it feels like an interior room. This is the trick of Mediterranean design. Create outdoor rooms that feel private. From the courtyard, doorways lead into different worlds. A dining room built for formal meals. A sitting room for conversation. A hall where music could echo. A corridor lined with ornament that makes you slow down and look. The surfaces tell you what kind of house this is. Tile underfoot. Stone that feels cool even in heat. Ceilings with painted detail. Ironwork that looks handmade. Everything suggests time and care. Nothing feels temporary. Then there are the views. One side of the estate faces the Atlantic. You can hear waves. You can smell the open ocean. On the other side, the lagoon is calmer. Boats glide across water that reflects the sky. This dual water identity is part of the magic. The house is always in dialogue with water. It is always between two moods. Wild ocean, quiet lagoon. Now picture the same walk at night during a grand event. The courtyard lit, music coming through open doors. Guests in formal clothes moving between rooms. Servers passing with trays. A host greeting people by name. The architecture is doing its job. It is making the guests feel that they have entered a world set apart from ordinary life. This is why the house was built. Not simply to be seen from the street, but to produce an experience, to shape behavior, to make gatherings feel like ceremonies. With that image in mind, we can talk about how Marjorie Post used the estate in the years that followed. From the start, the estate functioned like a stage set for Palm Beach society. Marjorie and Edward Hutton used Mar-a-Lago as a winter residence. They typically stayed during the heart of the season. Mid-January through late March was often the peak period for the most intense social calendar. Marjorie held dinners for influential guests. She hosted musical performances. She staged gatherings that mixed glamour with philanthropic purpose. In March of 1927, soon after the estate was finished, she and Hutton held an elegant dinner before a major costume ball in the region. The details of costume and ceremony reveal the culture of the time. Palm Beach elites liked to play with European history. They dressed like royalty and reenacted an imagined past as a way to express their own power in the present. But Marjorie also believed that hosting could serve causes. She supported charities and used the estate as a tool. The charity ball at Mar-a-Lago was not simply a party. It was a fundraiser that took advantage of the social desire to be seen doing good. In 1929, she staged a charity event that included a performance by the Ringling Bros and Barnum and Bailey Circus. The spectacle was extraordinary, a circus on the grounds of a private palace. Yet she also invited underprivileged children to attend. In a moment when the country was sliding into economic crisis, she used her wealth to create both fundraising and a kind of joy for those who rarely experienced it. Decades later, in 1957, she founded the International Red Cross Ball. The ball became a major social and charitable tradition, and it has traditionally been held at Mar-a-Lago. This tells you something important. Mar-a-Lago was not an occasional party house. It was built to sustain rituals across decades. It was designed to be the kind of place that could host tradition. Behind all of this, glamour was labor. A palace like this requires constant work. Cooks, housekeepers, gardeners, maintenance teams, drivers, security, laundry staff, servers, administrators. Everyday systems had to run. Flowers arranged, silver polished, tiles cleaned, carpets beaten, storm shutters checked, boilers inspected, roofs examined after heavy rain. This is the secret that separates a palace from a fantasy. A palace is only as good as its staff. And that is why palaces become fragile when money or attention disappears. For decades, Marjorie maintained that staff and that attention. But her life was not only Palm Beach. It extended into diplomacy and global history. And that global life influenced what Mar-a-Lago meant. In 1935, Marjorie Post married Joseph E. Davies. Davies was a lawyer and diplomat who served as United States ambassador to the Soviet Union from 1936 to 1938. Marjorie accompanied him to Moscow. She entered a world far removed from Palm Beach sunshine. A world of political tension and controlled spectacle. During those years, she developed a deep interest in Russian art and imperial objects. She and Davies acquired many Russian works. Later, these collections became part of her legacy at Hillwood, an estate in Washington, D.C. that became a museum. The collections included objects that connected her to a vanished empire. Faberge works, icons, porcelain, and more. This detail matters because it shows how Marjorie approached places. She did not only decorate, she curated. She collected history and arranged it into living spaces. Mar-a-Lago itself was an act of curation. Old world materials set into new walls. A palace in Florida built from pieces of Europe. Her diplomatic life also connects Mar-a-Lago to broader American history. The estate was never only a vacation home. It was part of a network of wealth and influence that touched politics. That network grew stronger in the decades after World War II. During World War II, Mar-a-Lago took on roles that reflected national needs. In 1944, Marjorie offered the grounds of the estate to veterans who needed occupational therapy. A property designed for ballroom events and society dinners became a space for healing. Gardens used not as decoration but as work and recovery. It shows that a place can change meaning while its walls remain the same. After the war, Palm Beach society returned to glamour, but the American economy and culture began shifting. The era of massive private staffs began to fade. Labor costs rose. Taxes changed. Many families found it harder to justify maintaining enormous estates. At the same time, land values climbed and developers saw opportunity. Across Palm Beach, many grand houses from the early 20th century were demolished. The island gradually lost a large portion of its older mansions. Mar-a-Lago survived those decades because Marjorie remained committed. But as she aged, she faced the question that every builder of a monument faces. What happens when I am gone? And she chose an answer that seemed both patriotic and practical. Give the palace to the nation. By the 1950s and 1960s, the world that created Mar-a-Lago was fading. The Gilded Age and the Roaring Twenties had produced a culture where huge staffs were normal for the very wealthy. A private house could employ dozens of people. It could host hundreds of guests. It could operate almost like a hotel without calling itself one. Then America changed. New tax structures and rising labor costs made full-time domestic staffs less common. Cultural tastes shifted toward modern design and simpler lines. Some families moved away from the idea of a winter court. Others kept the habit but in smaller homes. And as the decades moved on, Palm Beach land became even more valuable. Developers saw old estates as obstacles. Why preserve a sprawling old mansion when you can build several newer homes? Why keep a giant house that requires constant repair when you can sell the land and reduce the headache? This is why so many grand estates disappeared in the 20th century. Not only in Florida, across the United States, a mansion built for one generation can become a burden for the next. Children inherit history and also inherit bills. If the bills are too high, history becomes optional. Marjorie Post understood this danger. She watched other estates vanish. She also understood that her own fortune would not necessarily control the property forever. A future owner might not care about the story. A future owner might see only land value. And once demolition happens, there is no undo button. So as she aged, she began thinking like a strategist again. Not just about what she loved, but about how to protect it. In 1957, when she founded the International Red Cross Ball, she was not only creating a charitable tradition, she was anchoring Mar-a-Lago to a public narrative. If the estate became the home of an annual event that society expected, then the building gained another layer of meaning. It became part of the calendar, part of the identity of Palm Beach. Tradition can be a form of protection. Still, tradition alone is not enough. A building needs ownership and a budget. So Marjorie considered the biggest possible owner, the United States government. Her idea made emotional sense. If a building has national importance, then the nation could hold it. If a building is used for diplomacy, then its costs could be justified. She imagined presidents hosting foreign leaders under Florida sun. She imagined ceremonies that would give the estate a purpose beyond private luxury. A winter retreat that could sit beside places like Camp David in the public imagination. This is where idealism meets reality. Even before the estate was transferred, there were practical questions. How often would presidents truly use it? How would security work on a barrier island? How would the government staff such a place year-round? And what happens when administrations change and preferences change? Marjorie made her decision anyway. She believed the vision was worth the attempt. And when she died in 1973, the estate moved into a new phase. No longer a private palace. Now a public question. Marjorie wanted Mar-a-Lago to outlast her. She did not want it to be chopped into pieces or demolished for new construction. She imagined a public purpose, a diplomatic retreat, a winter White House. In 1972, Mar-a-Lago was placed on the National Register of Historic Places. The listing recognized the estate as historically significant. It captured a moment of Palm Beach resort culture before the Great Depression and preserved an example of the grand way of life during the Florida land boom. Marjorie died in 1973. In her will, she left Mar-a-Lago to the United States government. She hoped it would be used for presidential visits and for foreign dignitaries. The plan sounded glamorous. A president hosting leaders in a palace between sea and lagoon. But the government quickly learned what private owners already knew. The romance of a palace disappears when the bills arrive. Maintenance costs were high. The property required constant staff, even when it was not in use. Security was complicated because of the island location and limited access points. The nearby airport created additional security concerns due to flight paths over the area. And presidents were not eager to adopt the estate as a regular retreat. Richard Nixon preferred his own Florida retreat in Key Biscayne. Jimmy Carter did not embrace the idea of using Mar-a-Lago. the federal government tried to evaluate potential uses. It was not that officials could not see the beauty, it was that beauty did not translate into practical routine. A presidential retreat has to fit strict security requirements and also has to be used often enough to justify the expense. Mar-a-Lago did not fit easily into that rhythm. In 1980, Mar-a-Lago was designated a National Historic Landmark. The title confirmed its national significance. But a title does not fund roofs or plumbing. The federal government still had to decide whether to keep paying for a property it was not using. In late 1980, Congress returned the property to the Post Foundation, and the transition completed around 1981. Now the foundation faced a difficult reality. They owned an enormous historic estate with enormous costs. They needed a buyer. They listed Mar-a-Lago for sale. The asking price reflected the value of the land and the grandeur of the building. But buyers did not line up. The estate was too big, the upkeep was too expensive, and the longer the property sat without full use, the more it deteriorated. A palace that is not lived in becomes fragile, fast. When you hear that Mar-a-Lago became a National Historic Landmark, you might assume that means protection, as if the government places a shield over the building. In reality, a landmark designation is recognition. It says the place matters to the nation. It does not automatically pay for painters, plumbers, roofers, gardeners, and security. Historic designations can create rules and expectations. They can shape what changes are allowed. They can encourage preservation, but they do not solve the basic problem that killed so many mansions in the 20th century. The problem of operating costs. This is why Marjorie Post's plan collided with reality. She was thinking like a private owner. Private owners can choose to spend money because they want a place to exist. Government agencies have to justify spending to taxpayers. They also have to meet strict security and operational requirements. Even if officials admired the estate, the numbers had to make sense on paper. So the estate drifted in an in-between state. Too historic to ignore, too expensive to embrace, and not essential enough to justify its scale. This is an important theme for anyone who loves old buildings. Preservation is not only about emotion, it is about systems. If you do not have a sustainable system, the building becomes vulnerable, no matter how famous it is. Chapter 11. The silence before the first blow. As the years passed, staff numbers declined. The gardens lost their careful shaping. Water damage appeared in places that once looked perfect. A feeling of abandonment settled in. It is hard to describe how quickly a large house can feel haunted. Not haunted by ghosts, haunted by absence. Rooms built for crowds feel wrong when empty. A ballroom without music is not just quiet. It feels unfinished. When a mansion is active, you do not notice small problems. A loose tile gets repaired. A crack gets filled. A stain gets cleaned. When it is inactive, every problem grows. A crack becomes a split. A small leak becomes rot. A broken window becomes humidity inside walls. The climate in Florida accelerates decay. Heat and moisture are relentless. The foundation faced a choice that was brutal but rational. If no one will buy the property, and if maintaining it drains resources, then removing it can look like mercy. Demolition removes future bills. It turns a complicated asset into open land. So demolition plans were approved. The estate was on the edge. This is where we return to the beginning of our story. Machines ready in 1985. A palace about to become rubble. But then a buyer appeared who wanted not just the land, but the story. Chapter 12. The negotiation that saved the walls. Donald Trump was rising in New York real estate in the early 1980s. He was building hotels and towers and building his public image at the same time. Mar-a-Lago fit that image. It was a ready-made icon. Trump made an early offer around $15 million. It was rejected. The foundation hoped for more. The property had been valued at far higher figures. And why not? 17 acres in Palm Beach. A mansion recognized as historic. A name that sounded like luxury. But the market did not cooperate. Time passed. The building sat. The costs continued. Interest faded. Trump then played a leverage game. He purchased a strip of land between Mar-a-Lago and the ocean from a neighboring owner. Reports identify that owner as Jack Massey. Trump paid about $2 million. Then he suggested he might build a house there that would block the beach view from Mar-a-Lago. Whether he truly intended to build is less important than what the threat did. It changed perception. Competing buyers did not want to pay a fortune for a mansion that might lose its view. In real estate, perception can be everything. If people believe an asset might shrink in value, they step away. With competition cooled, negotiations shifted. The foundation still faced bills. Demolition was still a possibility. And Trump now had leverage. In 1985, he bought Mar-a-Lago itself for about $7 million. Different accounts put the combined cost around $10 million when you include furnishings and related items. However, the numbers are described, the conclusion is the same. A palace that was about to be destroyed now had an owner. The machines could be turned off. But ownership immediately raised the next question. How do you keep it? How do you justify it? How do you make a palace make sense in a modern economy? If you have never managed a historic building, imagine this. A small leak in a modern home is annoying. A small leak in a historic mansion can destroy irreplaceable material. Water finds a seam. It seeps behind plaster. It touches woodwork carved decades ago. It stains a ceiling painted by artists who are long gone. It warps a door that was built by hand. Then the repair is not just a patch. It becomes restoration. Specialists. Custom work. High cost. Now multiply that by the size of Mar-a-Lago. Multiple roofs. Multiple wings. Courtyards. Outbuildings. Staff areas. Pools. Tennis courts. Landscaping, roads, gates, lighting, security systems, fire safety systems. A palace is not an object. It is a network of systems that must work every day. Trump explored development ideas. At one point, he proposed dividing the property into smaller lots. Local authorities rejected the plan. Palm Beach was protective of zoning and historic character. A subdivision would change the meaning of the estate and might open the door for other major changes on the island. So, that option closed. With development restricted, Trump moved to a model that has saved many large estates over the last century. Turn it into a club. Instead of one family paying the bills, you create a membership base. Many people pay to keep the lights on. In exchange, they gain access to a world that feels exclusive. In April of 1995, Mar-a-Lago became the Mar-a-Lago Club, a members-only club with guest rooms, dining, and resort-style amenities. The mansion became a venue. Weddings, galas, meetings, fundraisers, dinners. The place could now generate revenue, and revenue could support maintenance. This change did not erase the private aspect. The owner maintained private quarters in a separate area, but the public function of the property expanded. The mansion became both home and business. The club model also required legal agreements about preservation and use. Operating a club meant working with restrictions that shaped what could be built and what could not. Those details are complex, but the principle is clear. To keep the building alive, the owner had to find a sustainable use that did not destroy the historic character. When you look at a photograph of Mar-a-Lago, you see sunlight on walls and palm trees, and a tower against the sky. What you do not see is the daily labor. Without that labor, the picture collapses. Think about the courtyard alone. The stone has to be cleaned. Fountains have to be maintained. Plants have to be trimmed and replaced. Irrigation has to be monitored. In Florida, insects and mold are constant threats. If you stop for a month, the courtyard starts to look tired. If you stop for a year, it starts to look abandoned. Then the interiors. A painted ceiling needs careful climate control. A tile floor needs careful cleaning to avoid damage. Woodwork needs attention to prevent rot. Windows need sealing. Doors need adjustment. Air conditioning in a historic building is not just comfort, it is preservation. Humidity can destroy textiles and paper and wood. So, you are paying for air conditioning not only for guests but for the building itself. A palace is like a living thing. It breathes. It sweats. It ages. If you feed it with staff and money, it stays strong. If you starve it, it collapses. This is why so many mansions disappeared. Not because people hated them, because people could not or would not feed them. Mar-a-Lago survived because it kept finding new ways to be fed. Over time, renovations continued. One major project was the creation of a large ballroom addition. According to the club-owned history, the Grand Ballroom was completed in 2005 and it is about 20,000 square feet. It was designed in a style that matched the exterior language of the estate. The purpose was straightforward. More space for events meant more income and more relevance in a modern luxury market. A club survives on steady demand. Big event capacity helps create that demand. You can see the logic. A mansion is a fixed cost. A wedding or gala is variable revenue. If you can host enough events, you can pay the fixed cost. If you cannot, then the building becomes a luxury only a few can sustain. This is why the story of Mar-a-Lago is not just architectural. It is economic. It is about how huge buildings survive in a country where private wealth builds monuments but does not always maintain them for generations. The ballroom became a symbol of the transformation. Marjorie built Mar-a-Lago to host the world. The club model turned hosting into a business. The ballroom made that business larger. Turning a palace into a club sounds simple. You open the gates and collect dues. In practice, it requires a delicate balance. If it feels too open, it loses its mystique. If it feels too closed, it cannot generate enough revenue. A members-only club sells a feeling. The feeling is access. Access to space, access to status, access to people. When you pay dues, you are not only paying for a pool or a dining room. You are paying to tell yourself and others that you belong inside the gates. Palm Beach has always understood this psychology. The season is built on it. Hotels and clubs and private homes all use the same currency. Visibility and proximity. Who you sit near, who you meet in a hallway, who you greet on a terrace. So the club model fit the culture of the island. It took the old social machine and added a modern revenue engine. Initiation fees, annual dues, event rentals, guest room nights, food and beverage income. All of that money cycles back into staff and maintenance. And the more events the club hosts, the more the building stays alive. This is why you can think of the Mar-a-Lago Club as a form of preservation through use. A museum preserves by restricting contact. A club preserves by keeping the building busy enough to pay for care. It is a different philosophy, but for many estates, it is the only philosophy that works. Now step back and look at the whole arc. Palm Beach began as a settlement on a rough coast. Then a shipwreck story and a cargo of coconuts helped shape the image and the name. Then Flagler built a railroad and luxury hotels and invented the Palm Beach season. He created the stage. In the 1920s, Marjorie Post arrived with wealth and ambition and imagination. She built a palace of imported history. She designed it to host the world. She used it to entertain and to raise money for charity. She made the estate a symbol of a particular kind of American wealth. Then she tried to give the estate a national purpose. A winter White House. A diplomatic retreat. A place that could serve presidents and foreign leaders. But the government could not carry the cost. The dream collided with maintenance and security reality. The estate returned to the foundation. The market rejected it, and it slid toward demolition. Then Trump bought it and stopped the machines. He treated it as a trophy and a brand. And he found a way to keep it alive by turning it into a club. A private business that could fund preservation through membership and events. The building remained, but the meaning shifted. From private palace to proposed public retreat to endangered relic to private club. This shifting meaning is the real story of Mar-a-Lago. The imported tiles and courtyards and tower matter, but the deeper lesson is about survival. A building survives when it has a role, when it has an economy around it, when it has people moving through it and caring for it, when it has a reason to open its doors again and again. Before we end, return again to that imagined morning in 1985. The machines are there. The paperwork is done. In another universe, the first blow lands. Walls fall. Tiles shatter. Courtyard fountains fill with dust. And the island loses one of its most extreme artifacts of the 1920s. If that had happened, Mar-a-Lago would survive only as photographs and stories. And the phrase sea to lake might be attached to a different building today, or to nothing at all. This is why the story stays in your mind. Because it is not a story of a mansion built and kept forever. It is a story of a mansion that nearly vanished. A reminder that even the grandest symbols of wealth are fragile when the money stops. It is also a reminder that preservation is not only about loving history, it is about paying for history. It is about staff and plumbing and roofs and paint and security. It is about constant care. Mar-a-Lago survived because someone paid. First, Marjorie Post paid to build it and to operate it as a palace. Then the government tried to pay, but could not justify the expense. Then a private owner paid again and turned the building into an income-generating machine. So what is Mar-a-Lago, in the simplest terms? It is a surviving Palm Beach estate from the Florida land boom era. It is a building filled with imported craft and theatrical design. It is a place that hosted charity and spectacle. It is a place that the United States government once hoped to use and then returned because of cost and security complexity. It is a place saved from demolition in 1985. It is now a club that uses membership and events to fund maintenance. And it is a warning, because every historic building eventually faces the same question. Do we keep paying? Do we keep caring? Do we keep the doors open? Or do we let the machines return? Mar-a-Lago refused to disappear once. Not because history is invincible, but because in that moment someone decided the story was worth the price. There is a reason the story of Mar-a-Lago keeps returning to the public. It is not only because powerful people have spent time there. It is because the building itself is an argument. It argues that money can build beauty. It argues that taste can be staged. It argues that a private individual can create something that looks like a national monument. And then it argues the opposite. That even a national government may decide the monument is too expensive, that a palace can be unwanted, that history can sit empty and decay. Most stories about wealth begin with acquisition. This story begins with near loss. A palace almost erased. That makes you pay attention, because it reminds you that the world is not as stable as it looks in photographs. It also shows how places become symbols. Marjorie Post built Mar-a-Lago to express hospitality and grandeur and philanthropy. She wanted to make a space where art and music and charity could share the same rooms. Later, the government looked at the same rooms and saw security challenges and maintenance costs. Later, a private owner looked again and saw marketing and membership. Same walls, different meaning. That is why you can never fully separate architecture from the society around it. Buildings do not only reflect taste, they reflect the systems that support them. Railroads, tourism, labor, taxes, rules, politics, culture. When the systems change, the building has to adapt or disappear. Mar-a-Lago adapted. It survived a boom era. It survived cultural shifts. It survived a failed national dream. It survived neglect. It survived the moment when machines were ready to reduce it to dust. So the next time you see a photograph of the tower against blue sky, remember the hidden story. Remember the quiet years. Remember that behind the gates, the building once sat close to death. And remember the uncomfortable truth that applies to every historic place you love. Survival is not guaranteed. It has to be purchased again and again. End of script.